Claire Bennett stared at her phone, thumb hovering over the screen, paralyzed by the simple words glowing in the group message. "Don't come this year." The sentence felt heavier than a boulder, suffocating in its brevity. Thanksgiving was supposed to be her chance to reconnect, to step back into a family that had spent decades making her feel unwanted. Instead, those 5 words struck like a hammer to the chest, echoing every rejection, every cold glance, every whispered insult from the past. Her living room, filled with the scent of burning candles, seemed suddenly too small, claustrophobic, a cage for her spiraling thoughts. She pressed the phone against her forehead, as if trying to absorb the words physically, to understand why they hurt so much. Margaret's perfectionist tone was unmistakable, filtered through the digital medium, controlling, sharp, dismissive. And Robert, passive as ever, had not intervened. Claire's chest tightened. She had always known her parents' love came with conditions she could never meet. Memories of childhood Thanksgivings, where she sat quietly while everyone else laughed, replayed like film reels. Her pulse raced, a mix of anger and sadness feeding a growing fire inside her. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she wiped it quickly, refusing to let vulnerability dominate her. She had spent years burying her resentment, practicing the mask of civility when family gatherings loomed. But tonight, alone in her apartment, the walls absorbed the full weight of her emotions. The injustice of being excluded, of being silenced, of being told she wasn't welcome, was unbearable. And beneath the hurt, a darker thought began to take root, a seed of defiance that whispered, "If they won't invite me, I'll take control in my own way." Claire's mind raced as she paced, running through options. Phone calls could go unanswered, texts could be ignored, flights could be canceled. But there was one thing no one in her family had thought to secure properly: the cabin they had reserved in the mountains for the weekend. The thought hit her like lightning, a dangerous thrill coursing through her veins. The cabin represented their control, their annual traditions, and their smug certainty that everything would unfold according to their plan. Suddenly, the idea of taking it from them, of disrupting their perfect little holiday, was irresistible. She sank onto the couch, hugging a throw pillow, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Selling the cabin wasn't just rebellion, it was poetic justice, a way to reclaim power she had never truly had. She imagined their faces when they arrived, confident in their plans, only to find the keys gone, their tradition dismantled. The fantasy made her mouth twitch in a small, guilty smile. She knew it was risky, even cruel, but for the first time in years, she felt in control of something that mattered. Her gaze drifted to the framed photo of her as a child, smiling awkwardly at a Thanksgiving table crowded with relatives who ignored her presence. She clenched her fists, the memory of exclusion fueling her resolve. Years of being marginalized, silenced, and minimized boiled into one decisive thought: they won't decide this time. Claire's mind sharpened, plotting logistics, imagining the conversations, the disbelief, the fury. Every scenario made her pulse quicken, feeding both the thrill of revenge and the quiet terror of crossing a line she might never come back from. Claire grabbed her laptop and began researching the cabin's ownership details, rental agreements, and potential buyers. Each click, each detail uncovered, stoked a dangerous excitement. She imagined herself as the architect of disruption, pulling strings from the shadows, invisible yet omnipotent. The thought of her parents' reaction, Margaret's controlled fury, Robert's silent panic, was intoxicating. She paused, realizing the thrill was tempered by fear, yet that fear only fueled her determination. Tonight, she decided, she would act, and nothing could stop her. Hours passed as she meticulously organized the sale, calculating timelines, drafting messages, and ensuring no trace could connect back to her. Claire's apartment, once cozy and quiet, became a war room of strategy, with spreadsheets, emails, and phone numbers strewn across the table. The adrenaline coursed through her veins like wildfire. She felt both invincible and vulnerable, aware that a single misstep could ignite a storm far beyond her control. And yet, she couldn't stop. She was finally claiming power she had never had, and the thought made her heart pound with a wild, terrifying joy. By the time the first hints of dawn filtered through her blinds, Claire leaned back, exhausted, but exhilarated. The plan was in motion. The cabin would no longer be their perfect retreat, their symbol of control and tradition. And for the first time in years, Claire felt a sense of ownership over her own life. her own choices, her own narrative. She knew the weekend would be chaotic, that the confrontation would be inevitable, but she no longer cared. This was her moment, her defiance, and nothing would stop her from seeing it through. Claire sat cross-legged on her apartment floor, surrounded by sheets of notes, cabin listings, and spreadsheets, her mind buzzing with possibilities. The thrill of rebellion mingled with a creeping sense of guilt, but she pushed it aside. Every detail mattered: the cabin's exact location, its owner, the weekend's reservation dates, even the small key box hidden under a loose floorboard. Each piece of information was a weapon, and she felt powerful for the first time in years, orchestrating a plan that no one would see coming. Her laptop glowed in the dim light, illuminating her determined face as she drafted messages to potential buyers. She had to be careful, precise, deliberate. Any hint of connection to her family could ruin everything. Claire's fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating at every word. Selling the cabin wasn't just an act of defiance. It was a statement, a rebellion that screamed louder than any confrontation could. Her heartbeat quickened at the thought of Margaret and Robert arriving, unsuspecting, only to have their carefully curated plans collapse. She paused to think about her parents, their expectations, their assumptions about her life. Margaret had always painted her as reckless, selfish, and unworthy, judgments Claire had internalized for years. But tonight, she would invert that narrative. Tonight, she would take control, redefine the terms. The plan was audacious, borderline cruel, yet the adrenaline pumping through her veins made it feel justified. Every past humiliation, every ignored birthday, every whispered insult fueled her determination to act without hesitation. Claire imagined the phone call or text Margaret would send when she discovered the sale. "What do you mean the cabin is gone?" The thought made her pulse spike, and her lips curl in a small, guilty smile. Robert would stumble, flustered, attempting to mediate, only to realize he had no control. Claire felt a strange satisfaction imagining them scrambling, facing chaos she had crafted with her own hands. The act of rebellion was not just about the cabin. It was about reclaiming her agency, a symbolic victory over a lifetime of exclusion. She reviewed the cabin details again, obsessively checking dates, policies, and any loopholes she could exploit. She imagined herself speaking to the buyer, negotiating price and terms, savoring the thrill of invisible power. Each imagined interaction, each step of the plan, intensified the cocktail of fear and exhilaration swirling inside her. The meticulousness of her plotting made her feel alive, as though every calculation, every contingency, was a chess move in a game her parents didn't even know they were playing. Claire's mind wandered to past Thanksgivings, the laughter she had never felt part of, the teasing glances she had endured, the family stories in which she was an outsider. She had learned to survive in the margins, to measure her words carefully, to mask disappointment with politeness. But tonight, survival alone wasn't enough. Tonight demanded action, audacity, and a willingness to risk everything. The sale of the cabin was her rebellion, her catharsis, and her reckoning all at once. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples, imagining the weekend chaos. Would Margaret cry? Would Robert explode? Would the family finally see her as a force to be reckoned with, rather than the overlooked daughter? The questions fueled her excitement and anxiety equally. She knew she was treading dangerous waters. Her parents could react in ways she had never anticipated, but the thrill of shaking their carefully constructed world outweighed the fear of consequences. Claire paused, reflecting on her own moral compass, aware that selling the cabin was a transgression. She had wrestled with guilt, imagining the ethical fallout of her actions, but concluded that the years of marginalization, emotional neglect, and rejection justified this radical step. She wasn't just selling a cabin, she was reclaiming power, making her presence felt in a world that had long ignored her. The moral ambiguity of her actions made them taste sweeter, like forbidden fruit. By the time the night deepened, and the city lights flickered outside her window, Claire had drafted her first message to the potential buyer. Every word was calculated, every phrase designed to intrigue and convince without revealing her identity. Her hand trembled slightly as she pressed send, the first irreversible step in a plan that would forever alter her family's Thanksgiving. In that instant, fear, exhilaration, and triumph collided, and Claire realized there was no turning back. She had chosen her path, and it would soon confront her parents in a way they could never ignore. Claire's fingers hovered over the keyboard, the glow of her laptop reflecting the intensity in her eyes. She had found a buyer interested in the cabin, a couple who wanted a quiet weekend in the mountains, oblivious to the drama she was about to unleash. Her pulse quickened at the thought of negotiating, of controlling the transaction completely. She typed cautiously, carefully wording her message to pique interest without revealing too much. Each sentence carried weight, a subtle power she had never wielded before. The excitement was intoxicating, a dangerous rush she couldn't resist. As she waited for a response, Claire's mind raced, imagining the buyer's surprise at her efficiency and clarity. She pictured herself as a mastermind, pulling strings from the shadows, orchestrating chaos for her parents' pristine weekend. The thrill mingled with a pang of guilt, a whisper that perhaps she had crossed an unseen line. But she pushed it aside. The world had ignored her for years. Now it was her turn to define the rules. Each imagined scenario added fuel to her adrenaline, making her pulse pound in rhythm with her determination. The reply came faster than expected, polite and curious, expressing genuine interest. Claire's heart surged. This was it, the first tangible step toward her rebellion. She smiled, savoring the control, the sense that she was finally being taken seriously. Negotiations began in earnest. Dates, pricing, and details, each carefully calculated. She imagined her parents' faces, arriving at the cabin with smug confidence, only to find the keys in someone else's hands. The image made her chest tighten with a mixture of triumph and fear. She crafted her responses with precision, feeling both exhilarated and terrified. Every phrase had to balance legitimacy and anonymity, a tightrope walk across a moral chasm she couldn't ignore. Claire considered the implications, legal, ethical, and emotional, but dismissed them with the same determination that had fueled her plan from the start. This wasn't just a sale, it was a statement, a confrontation executed with cold, calculated poise. The buyer's excitement and trust reinforced her audacity. Hours passed as she meticulously finalized the details, triple-checking every message and document. Claire felt a strange pride in her meticulousness, the same kind of pride her parents had always denied her. She imagined delivering the news, the ripple of confusion, frustration, and disbelief that would follow. Margaret's sharp tongue, Robert's hesitant attempts to mediate, and the family's stunned faces all appeared vividly in her mind. Each vision fed her adrenaline, making her pulse quicken and her fingers itch to send the final confirmation. Finally, she sent the last message, sealing the transaction, her heart hammering against her ribs. The cabin was no longer theirs. The act felt surreal, like stepping off a ledge into a mixture of liberation and terror. Claire sank back in her chair, her mind swirling with imagined reactions, moral conflict, and the intoxicating thrill of power. It was done. There was no turning back, only anticipation of the storm she had just set in motion. She leaned back and exhaled, allowing herself a fleeting moment of satisfaction. The sense of control was overwhelming, a heady mix of revenge, liberation, and self-assertion. Yet beneath it, a subtle tremor of doubt lingered, whispering warnings of consequences she couldn't yet see. The weekend was coming, the confrontation inevitable, and the tension coiled tighter in her chest. Claire felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, fueled by audacity, anger, and the thrilling anticipation of watching her plan unfold. By the time the night ended, Claire had reviewed every detail thrice, double-checked the buyer's account, and confirmed the payment. Her adrenaline still coursed, leaving her restless and exhilarated. She knew the coming days would be tense, full of uncertainty, but the satisfaction of finally asserting control, of disrupting the family's flawless little weekend, made every anxious moment worth it. She was ready for whatever chaos her decision would unleash, ready to watch her parents scramble, powerless, for the first time in decades. Claire stared at the confirmation email, her hands trembling despite the excitement coursing through her veins. The cabin had officially been sold. The keys, the weekend, the perfect family retreat, gone. A wave of triumph washed over her, so sweet and overwhelming that she had to close her eyes and breathe it in. The thought of Margaret and Robert arriving, confident in their plans, only to be blindsided, made her pulse race. Every past Thanksgiving humiliation, every overlooked birthday, every whispered slight crystallized in this moment. She had seized power, and it felt intoxicating. But triumph came hand in hand with a whisper of guilt, creeping along the edges of her mind. Was she crossing a line she couldn't return from? She shook the thought away, telling herself that years of exclusion, of being ignored and dismissed, justified this act. The thrill of control was too intoxicating to relinquish now. She imagined the cabin, once a symbol of her parents' dominance, now in the hands of strangers, untouched by family expectations or carefully orchestrated traditions. Her plan was complete, and yet the tension in her chest refused to dissipate. She pictured the scene vividly. Margaret's incredulous stare, Robert's flustered attempts to negotiate, her cousin's confusion as their anticipated weekend unraveled. Each imagined expression sharpened her sense of satisfaction, but also amplified her apprehension. This wasn't a prank. It was a confrontation executed from behind a veil of calculated precision. The moral ambiguity gnawed at her briefly, but the seductive power of her actions drowned it out. Claire had become the architect of disruption, and she couldn't deny the intoxicating allure of it. Claire decided to document everything meticulously, creating a timeline, noting every email, every payment confirmation, every message sent. She wanted to be prepared for any fallout, any accusations, any attempts at reversing the sale. The act of organization reinforced her sense of control, transforming her fear into a methodical triumph. Even as adrenaline coursed through her veins, she felt a strange calm, a rare clarity that had eluded her during years of family neglect. For once, she wasn't reacting. She was orchestrating. The thought of her parents scrambling to find an alternative, their weekend plans destroyed, sent a thrill through her. She imagined Margaret pacing the living room, her face pale with disbelief, words fumbling in a futile attempt at blame. Robert would stammer, caught between anger and helplessness. Every scenario, vivid and detailed, made Claire's lips curl in a satisfied, almost wicked smile. She knew she had shifted the balance of power, however temporarily, and the knowledge sent a rush of adrenaline she couldn't contain. Yet, in the quiet moments, Claire couldn't ignore the nervous flutter in her stomach. What if the buyer discovered her identity? What if Margaret discovered it before the weekend? The thought of confrontation loomed large, threatening to unseat the thrill she had built. But she reminded herself that she had planned every step carefully, every angle accounted for, and that her parents had underestimated her for too long. The tension was part of the pleasure. The tightrope walk between exhilaration and fear intensified everything. By late evening, Claire sat back in her chair, exhaustion tugging at her limbs, but her mind refused to rest. She reviewed the transaction repeatedly, imagining every possible reaction, every worst-case scenario. Her pulse still thrummed with adrenaline, a relentless reminder of the audacity she had displayed. The cabin, once a symbol of family control and tradition, was now a testament to her independence and defiance. She felt both liberated and terrified, knowing that the weekend ahead would define the consequences of her actions. Finally, she allowed herself a small, triumphant laugh, the first genuine moment of levity in weeks. The act was done, irreversible, and potent. She felt the intoxicating mixture of fear, exhilaration, and power that comes with seizing control from those who have denied it. For the first time in years, Claire had rewritten the rules, creating chaos on her own terms. And as she looked out the window at the city lights, a small, dark smile crept across her face. She was ready for whatever storm her actions would unleash. Claire's phone buzzed unexpectedly, dragging her from the quiet satisfaction she had been savoring. A call from Margaret flashed across the screen, the name alone triggering a familiar mix of anxiety and defiance. She hesitated, heart pounding, before answering, rehearsing a calm, innocent tone that masked the storm beneath. Margaret's voice, sharp and measured, cut through the speaker. "Claire, I need to know if you've been handling the cabin reservation." The question, casual yet probing, felt like a probe for weakness, a test she had to navigate with precision. Claire's throat went dry, adrenaline spiking as she fumbled for composure. "Of course, Mom," she said carefully, each word deliberate, masking her triumph and internal excitement. Margaret's silence on the other end was unnerving, stretching seconds into tension-filled eternities. "It just seems everything should be ready for the weekend," Margaret continued, voice tight with suspicion. Claire's mind raced. She had covered every digital trace, every email, every confirmation. Yet the fear of exposure, of being caught before her parents even arrived, pressed like a weight against her chest. The conversation took a subtle turn, Margaret probing details about who would be there, whether utilities were arranged, if the cabin was still available. Claire answered cautiously, deflecting without lying outright, threading a delicate needle of truth and omission. She sensed the underlying anger, the faint tremor in Margaret's tone that betrayed growing suspicion. Robert's voice joined briefly, muffled in the background, hesitant and calm, but his presence only heightened the tension. Claire's pulse raced as she maintained her facade, each answer a calculated move in a high-stakes game she was determined to win. After a tense pause, Margaret said, "I'll double-check everything when we get there. I hope there won't be any surprises." Claire's chest tightened, the warning in her words unmistakable. She nodded silently, though the other side couldn't see, absorbing the implication. Her parents were beginning to sense something was amiss. The thrill of rebellion mingled with the sharp edge of fear. The stakes had shifted. Her careful orchestration could unravel with a single slip. Once the call ended, Claire sat back, hands trembling slightly, heart hammering. She realized Margaret's suspicions could escalate, forcing confrontation sooner than she had anticipated. The realization both exhilarated and terrified her. Her parents' awareness meant her act was potent, but fragile. Every carefully laid plan now carried the potential for immediate exposure. She ran through contingencies, imagining ways to deflect, delay, or distract, each scenario sharpening her nerves. Her gaze drifted to the cabin listing on her laptop, the details glaring back like a challenge. The property, once a symbol of her parents' control, now represented her audacity, her rebellion, and the precarious edge she balanced on. Claire's mind reeled with possibilities. What if Margaret and Robert arrived early? What if they tried to negotiate directly with the buyer? The tension coiled tighter in her chest, mixing excitement and dread into a single, intoxicating knot of anticipation. As the evening deepened, Claire found herself pacing, restless and jittery. She replayed the call repeatedly in her mind, dissecting Margaret's tone, analyzing the hidden clues of suspicion. Every subtle inflection, every pause, felt like a puzzle she needed to solve to maintain the upper hand. Her defiance remained intact, but the first real ripple of danger had emerged. The thrill of power now carried the added weight of risk, heightening every heartbeat, every thought, every careful calculation. By night's end, Claire sat alone in her apartment, the city outside quiet and indifferent, while her mind raced with plans and contingencies. Margaret's warning, though indirect, had shifted the weekend's dynamic entirely. Claire knew the confrontation was inevitable. It was only a matter of time before her parents discovered the truth. Yet beneath the tension, a dark satisfaction lingered. Her rebellion was real, potent, and imminent. The storm she had unleashed was approaching, and Claire was ready to face it on her own terms. Claire watched from her apartment window as her parents' car disappeared into the distance, their weekend plans still firmly in mind, unaware that the cabin was no longer theirs. The crisp mountain air and distant pine trees mocked her from afar, a reminder that reality was about to collide with her careful orchestration. Margaret's voice had echoed in her memory all week, sharp and suspicious, yet blind to the truth Claire now held. Claire's pulse raced with anticipation, every passing second stretching the tension like a taut wire. She imagined their arrival, the initial confusion giving way to frustration, and it made her chest tighten with a mix of triumph and dread. The first call came mid-afternoon, Robert's voice trembling slightly. "Claire, we can't find the cabin," he said, attempting calm while frustration leaked through every word. Margaret shouted in the background, sharp and accusatory, though Claire could only hear muffled echoes. The chaos she had imagined unfolded in reality, confirming the power of her carefully laid plan. She bit her lip, a guilty smile forming as adrenaline surged. The cabin, once a symbol of her parents' control, now represented her audacious independence and daring. Claire's phone buzzed again. This time it was Margaret, furious and demanding explanations. How could this happen? The keys, the reservation, they were ours. The voice that had once dismissed her feelings now trembled with helpless anger. Claire texted carefully, feigning ignorance, her fingers shaking with exhilaration and fear. Every word was a tightrope act, balancing truth and deception in perfect measure. She imagined Margaret pacing the cabin floor, helpless to reclaim control, and her pulse quickened. Meanwhile, Claire's mind raced through possible fallout scenarios. What if her parents decided to confront the buyer directly? What if the sale was reversed before the weekend ended? The stakes suddenly felt sharper, heavier, more dangerous, but she refused to retreat. The thrill of orchestrating chaos outweighed fear. She sipped her coffee, heart hammering, relishing the tension as she calculated her next steps. For the first time, she felt completely alive in the power she had claimed. Margaret and Robert's confusion escalated as more details emerged, their attempts at problem-solving futile. Claire imagined Margaret's face, flushed with frustration, voice rising with panic, while Robert muttered excuses and apologies that only fueled her dark satisfaction. Every imagined moment heightened her adrenaline, mixing guilt and delight in equal measure. She felt a strange sense of justice, vindicated after years of feeling overlooked and dismissed. Yet a small tremor of doubt whispered at the edges, warning her of consequences she could not yet see. As the afternoon faded into evening, Claire reflected on her growing sense of control. The cabin, the weekend, her parents' panic, it all reinforced her newfound agency. She allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction, watching the chaos unfold from the safety of distance. Each imagined reaction, each imagined argument, made the weekend feel like a stage for her rebellion. Yet even in triumph, the tension remained, a tight coil in her chest that promised the confrontation was only beginning. By nightfall, Claire finally leaned back in her chair, exhaustion mingling with exhilaration. The first wave of chaos had passed, but the storm of emotions, both hers and her parents', was far from over. She knew that tomorrow would bring direct confrontation, questions, accusations, and perhaps anger too raw to anticipate. And yet, beneath the fear, a dark satisfaction lingered. She had rewritten the rules of this Thanksgiving, claiming power where she had once been powerless. The weekend had begun, and Claire was ready to watch it unfold on her own terms. The next morning, Claire's phone rang incessantly, Margaret's sharp tone slicing through the quiet apartment. "Claire, we've tracked down the cabin owner. This is unacceptable." Every word vibrated with frustration and disbelief. Claire's pulse spiked, a mixture of exhilaration and apprehension coiling in her chest. She answered cautiously, masking excitement behind calm, measured words. "Mom, I don't know what happened," she said, voice steady, hiding the truth that thrilled and terrified her simultaneously. Robert joined the conversation, his tone hesitant and conciliatory. "Claire, we just want this resolved peacefully," he pleaded, attempting to mediate between Margaret's fury and the situation's reality. But Margaret's voice cut through with sharp accusations, and Claire could hear the tension building, the storm she had orchestrated finally colliding with reality. Every accusation, every word of outrage, felt like validation of her audacity. She realized that her parents were finally seeing her as someone capable of action, someone who could not be controlled. Claire felt a thrill mingled with guilt as she crafted her responses carefully, threading truth and deception together like a fragile tapestry. Every word was strategic, meant to delay discovery while maintaining the upper hand. Her heart hammered with anticipation. She was fully aware of the dangerous edge she now balanced on. The confrontation, though virtual, had already escalated, and she sensed that it would soon become physical, unavoidable, and far more intense. As the hours passed, the calls became more frequent, the questions sharper, and the accusations more biting. Claire imagined Margaret's frustration, pacing the cabin grounds, yelling in disbelief, while Robert attempted to mediate without authority. The chaos she had long fantasized about was no longer imagination. It was real, palpable, and devastatingly satisfying. Yet beneath the thrill, the first seeds of doubt had begun to sprout. Could her actions go too far? Could the rebellion she cherished so deeply spiral out of control? Mid-afternoon brought an unexpected twist. A neighbor of the cabin contacted Claire, mentioning an upcoming inspection that could complicate matters for her parents. Her pulse quickened as she realized the situation was escalating faster than anticipated. The buyer, too, could arrive early, throwing her careful plans into disarray. Each new variable amplified the tension, heightening both fear and exhilaration. Claire knew she had to remain precise, deliberate, and unwavering, balancing thrill with calculation. Later, Margaret threatened a direct visit to confront Claire in person, her voice trembling with fury and desperation. "We're coming over, Claire, and this will be explained," she shouted. Claire's hands tightened around the phone, her mind racing through contingencies and potential defenses. The imminent physical confrontation loomed like a storm on the horizon, promising chaos and emotional upheaval. Every scenario, every imagined reaction, both terrified and thrilled her, intensifying the emotional cocktail she had created. By nightfall, Claire sat in tense silence, listening to her parents' frustrated calls fade into the distance. The first confrontation had ended for the day, unresolved, but its impact lingered, vibrating through her nerves and mind. She felt triumphant, yet cautious, exhilarated, yet vulnerable. The balance of power had shifted, but the next wave of conflict was inevitable. And as the weekend stretched on, Claire realized the thrill of control came with its own dangerous price, one that she would have to navigate with cunning, courage, and a willingness to face the consequences of her rebellion. Claire sat in the dim light of her apartment, scrolling through old emails and messages as curiosity gnawed at her. Among them, she stumbled across correspondence between her parents and the cabin's previous owner, hinting at a long-hidden family secret. Her heart pounded as she read words about a financial struggle they had kept from everyone, a crisis that explained Margaret's controlling nature and Robert's passivity. For the first time, Claire felt a flicker of empathy amidst her rage. Everything she had interpreted as cruelty now bore shades of desperation and fear. Her fingers trembled as she pieced together fragments of letters and notes, realizing the cabin had not been merely a weekend retreat, but a financial safety net her parents had desperately tried to protect. Claire's mind raced with conflicting emotions, triumph from her rebellion, clashing with the sudden awareness of her parents' hidden vulnerability. Margaret's sharp, controlling behavior suddenly seemed less personal and more a shield against years of hardship. The revelation sliced through Claire's vindictive satisfaction like a cold wind. She leaned back, absorbing the weight of the secret. The knowledge made her victory feel complicated, even precarious. Was her rebellion justified, or had she unknowingly sabotaged a lifeline her parents desperately relied on? Her pulse quickened with guilt and anxiety, the thrill of chaos now tinged with moral uncertainty. The act she had planned with precision might have consequences far beyond a ruined weekend. Claire realized she had underestimated the stakes, and the shadow of potential regret stretched long and threatening. Claire's mind replayed every imagined reaction of Margaret and Robert, now viewed through a new lens. Their frustration and anger were no longer solely about the cabin. It was fear, panic, and vulnerability masked in fury. She recognized how little she had truly understood her parents, how much of the tension stemmed from ignorance on her part. For the first time, Claire felt the crushing weight of responsibility, realizing that her actions might have deep, unintended consequences. The revelation also stirred a quiet self-reflection. Years of resentment had fueled her rebellion, but had they blinded her to the complexities of her parents' lives? The line between justification and cruelty blurred, and Claire felt a pang of remorse threading through her excitement. She realized that the chaos she had orchestrated was not without cost, and that the fallout might leave permanent scars. The moral ambiguity she had once reveled in now demanded contemplation and careful navigation. A text from Ethan appeared unexpectedly, breaking her spiraling thoughts. "Are you okay? Sounds like things are escalating." His concern reminded Claire that she was not entirely alone, that someone outside the family could see both sides of the story. The message was a tether to reason, a voice of calm amidst the storm of her emotions. She considered reaching out, seeking guidance, but pride and fear held her back. She wanted control, yet the revelation of her parents' hidden struggles left her shaken. By nightfall, Claire sat silently, staring at the screen, her mind heavy with reflection. The weekend of chaos she had meticulously planned was now a web of moral complexity she hadn't anticipated. Triumph and guilt collided, leaving her unsure whether to continue, retreat, or attempt reconciliation. One thing was certain: the family she thought she knew was far more complicated, vulnerable, and human than she had realized. And as the shadows deepened, Claire understood that her rebellion had entered a new phase, one that demanded both courage and conscience. Claire's phone buzzed again, this time with a longer message from Ethan. "I think I can help. Let's talk." Her heart skipped a beat, the excitement of having an ally mingling with fear of further exposure. Ethan had always been perceptive, understanding her in ways her family never had. The weekend's chaos had left her tense, guilt gnawing at the edges, and the idea of someone else sharing the burden offered a rare comfort. She hesitated, then typed back cautiously, careful not to reveal too much. When they met later that evening at a quiet cafe, Claire felt a sense of relief washing over her. Ethan listened without judgment as she explained the situation, carefully omitting names but conveying the tension and her moral conflict. His eyes reflected understanding and concern, validating her emotions while challenging her perspective. "You're not just acting out of spite, Claire," he said softly. "But maybe there's a way to assert yourself without causing irreversible damage." The words struck her, a blend of reassurance and caution. As they strategized, Claire realized Ethan's calm presence offered a different kind of power, one grounded in insight rather than rebellion. He suggested steps to manage the situation, from ensuring the buyer was discreet to preparing for a direct conversation with her parents. Each suggestion was practical, measured, and thoughtful, contrasting sharply with the adrenaline-fueled chaos she had orchestrated alone. The contrast made Claire realize how much her initial approach had been shaped by anger and past resentment, rather than foresight. Ethan's involvement shifted her thinking. She could still maintain her sense of control and autonomy, but with guidance that minimized potential harm. His perspective reminded her that rebellion could be tempered with empathy, that power didn't require cruelty. Claire felt both gratitude and unease. Accepting help meant admitting vulnerability, something she had avoided for years. Yet the chaotic weekend loomed, and having an ally strengthened her resolve, while offering a safety net she hadn't realized she needed. Meanwhile, the tension in her parents' world continued to escalate. Margaret and Robert were frantically contacting every relevant authority, their frustration and desperation intensifying. Claire imagined Margaret pacing, face flushed, while Robert attempted reason and reconciliation with little effect. Each imagined scene brought both a thrill of power and a shadow of guilt, reminding Claire of the delicate balance she now walked. Ethan's presence, however, gave her clarity. She could navigate the weekend without losing control or morality entirely. By nightfall, Claire felt a cautious sense of optimism. The chaos she had unleashed was still in motion, but she was no longer facing it alone. Ethan's perspective offered a compass, guiding her through moral uncertainty while keeping the thrill of rebellion intact. She began to see ways to maintain autonomy, assert power, and even perhaps reconcile with her parents before irreparable damage occurred. The storm was far from over, but for the first time, Claire felt equipped to weather it with strategy rather than panic. As she returned home, the city lights glowing through her window, Claire felt the tension in her chest ease slightly. The weekend was far from resolved, the confrontation with her parents still inevitable, but she now had an ally and a plan. The moral weight of her actions had not disappeared, but with guidance and perspective, she could face the consequences with more control and insight. And as she prepared for the next day, Claire realized that the true test of her rebellion was just beginning, a test of cunning, empathy, and courage intertwined. The next morning, Claire's phone erupted with calls and messages, Margaret's voice sharp and insistent, Robert trying in vain to mediate. Every vibration made her pulse race, her nerves stretched taut like a bowstring. She hesitated before answering, steadying herself with deep breaths, knowing that this would be the first real confrontation. The storm she had orchestrated was now fully upon her, and the thrill of control mixed with a gnawing fear of consequences. Her rebellion, carefully planned, now demanded precision, composure, and courage in equal measure. Margaret's fury was palpable even through the phone, words lashing with disbelief and accusation. "Claire, this is outrageous. How could you sell the cabin without telling us?" she demanded, voice rising. Robert tried to interject, but Margaret's energy dominated the conversation, a tidal wave of anger and panic. Claire felt a mixture of exhilaration and dread, realizing how deeply her actions had unsettled them. The tension escalated further, each word carrying emotional weight, a reminder of how personal and powerful her rebellion had become. She responded cautiously, threading truth and deception with precision, deflecting questions while maintaining a veneer of innocence. Every syllable was calculated, every pause intentional, as she navigated the storm she had created. Margaret's insistence pressed harder, probing for cracks in her story, while Robert oscillated between disbelief and concern. Claire's heart raced as she imagined them pacing the cabin grounds, frantic and powerless. Each scenario heightened both adrenaline and guilt, a dangerous mix that left her simultaneously empowered and apprehensive. Ethan's earlier advice echoed in her mind, steadying her amidst the chaos. Maintain control without losing yourself. Think 2 steps ahead. Claire drew strength from the thought, using his counsel to craft measured responses, keeping her parents off balance while minimizing irreparable damage. The thrill of outmaneuvering them, tempered with the knowledge of their vulnerability, created a tension that was almost intoxicating. She realized that mastery over the situation required not just audacity, but strategy, patience, and a keen understanding of human emotion. As the conversation continued, Claire began to notice cracks in her parents' composure. Margaret's voice, though still sharp, betrayed uncertainty, and Robert's attempts at mediation grew more desperate. Claire sensed the shift, the first hint that her rebellion had unsettled not just their plans, but their emotional control. The power dynamic was evolving rapidly, and she felt a surge of vindication tempered by cautious empathy. She understood, in a new way, the complexities of family, pride, and long-held grudges intertwined with vulnerability. By mid-afternoon, the confrontation had reached its peak, neither side willing to yield, yet the conversation had forced reflection. Claire realized that her actions had consequences far beyond the weekend's chaos, touching emotions, histories, and insecurities she had never fully understood. The exhilaration of power was now mixed with responsibility, a realization that the next moves would define not only the weekend, but the family's fragile equilibrium. Each heartbeat reminded her that she had sparked a fire, and only careful navigation could prevent it from consuming everything. As evening fell, Claire leaned back, exhausted but alert, the weight of the confrontation settling in her chest. The tension had peaked, but resolution remained elusive, leaving the weekend suspended between chaos and the possibility of understanding. She felt a mixture of triumph and fear, exhilaration and guilt, aware that her rebellion had forever altered the dynamics of her family. And as she prepared for the coming hours, Claire knew that the true climax was still ahead, a test of courage, wit, and heart that would leave no one unchanged. Late that evening, Claire received an unexpected message from the cabin's buyer, hinting at something she hadn't anticipated, a personal connection to her family. Her pulse raced as she read the words, disbelief and curiosity colliding in equal measure. The buyer mentioned discovering old letters tucked in the cabin, correspondence that revealed struggles and sacrifices Claire had never known about. Her triumph suddenly felt fragile, overshadowed by a sense of responsibility she hadn't anticipated. The threads of rebellion and empathy tangled, leaving her both exhilarated and unsettled. Her mind replayed years of perceived neglect and coldness from her parents, now viewed in a different light. The letters spoke of sacrifices, financial pressures, and personal hardships that had shaped Margaret and Robert's decisions. Claire felt a wave of conflicting emotions: anger at past misunderstandings, sorrow for their struggles, and guilt for the chaos she had caused. For the first time, she questioned whether her rebellion, while justified in her eyes, had been blind to the depth of her parents' challenges. Claire reread the letters carefully, absorbing each revelation. Margaret had sacrificed promotions, savings, and even personal happiness to maintain family stability. Robert had quietly endured pressures and conflicts to keep peace, often absorbing blame to shield others. The realization pierced Claire's sense of moral clarity. The cabin had been more than a getaway. It had been a linchpin in a delicate balance she had disrupted. The weight of her actions pressed heavily on her, mingling regret with the thrill of power she had wielded. Her thoughts spiraled as she considered the weekend's unfolding chaos. Margaret's anger, Robert's hesitancy, and the family's confusion were now tinged with a new understanding. Claire realized her rebellion had forced her parents into vulnerability, exposing struggles they had long concealed. The exhilaration she had felt from disrupting their plans now collided with empathy, reshaping her perception of the power dynamic she had cherished. Every heartbeat reminded her that rebellion and understanding were not mutually exclusive, but intertwined in a fragile dance. As she pondered the implications, Claire recognized that her parents' reactions, though harsh, were rooted in fear and responsibility. Her careful orchestration of chaos had inadvertently revealed truths that might never have come to light otherwise. The moral complexity of the situation weighed heavily, leaving her to navigate not just anger and triumph, but also compassion and accountability. The thrill of control was tempered by the sobering reminder that every action carries unforeseen consequences, especially when intertwined with family bonds. Claire's phone buzzed again, this time with Ethan's message. "Do you see now? There's more at play than anger and rebellion." His words grounded her, highlighting the need for reflection alongside audacity. She realized that the coming hours would demand both courage and empathy, a careful balance to navigate the tangled web of truth, power, and emotion. The buyer's unexpected revelation had shifted the narrative, transforming the weekend from a simple act of defiance into a profound test of understanding and reconciliation. By midnight, Claire sat in quiet contemplation, the city lights shimmering through the window, the cabin, the sale, the confrontation, all now carried layers of meaning she hadn't anticipated. Triumph, guilt, empathy, and suspense merged into a tense cocktail of emotion, leaving her alert and reflective. She understood that the climax of the weekend was not just about chaos or revenge. It was about confronting hidden truths, acknowledging vulnerability, and navigating the fragile balance between rebellion and reconciliation. And as sleep eluded her, Claire braced for the revelations the next day would inevitably bring. The following morning, Claire's phone rang with a call from Margaret, her voice trembling between anger and vulnerability. "Claire, we need to talk. Now," she said, the sharp edge of fury softened by something unspoken. Claire felt her stomach knot with tension, the culmination of the weekend's chaos finally arriving. She knew this was the moment where rebellion and revelation would collide, where words could heal or further fracture the fragile balance. She drew in a deep breath, steadying herself for the confrontation she had both orchestrated and feared. When Claire arrived at the cabin, Margaret and Robert were waiting, their expressions a mixture of frustration, exhaustion, and unspoken worry. The silence between them was thick, punctuated only by the crackling fire in the living room. Claire could see the weight of the letters, the secrets that had been revealed, etched into their faces. For the first time, she saw vulnerability where she had only seen control, and empathy mingled with the adrenaline still thrumming in her veins. The tension was palpable, a delicate thread stretched tight between confrontation and understanding. Margaret began, voice quivering. "We didn't expect you to act this way, Claire. We thought you were angry, but we didn't know why." Her words revealed both relief and fear, the duality of emotions that had driven their behavior for years. Robert's voice followed, quieter, but no less intense. "We made mistakes, yes, but we never wanted to hurt you." Claire's heart ached, torn between the thrill of having asserted herself and the weight of the unintended consequences her rebellion had caused. The weekend's chaos now felt like a fragile bridge between anger and reconciliation. Claire found herself speaking honestly for the first time, explaining her feelings of neglect, frustration, and desire for agency. She recounted years of being overlooked, her emotions laid bare in words that trembled with vulnerability. Her parents listened, their expressions softening, the anger giving way to realization. The cabin, the chaos, the rebellion, it had all been a lens through which they finally saw each other. Every word built a bridge across years of misunderstanding, turning conflict into connection. As tears welled in Margaret's eyes, she confessed, "We were trying to protect you in our own way, but we lost sight of how it felt for you." Robert added quietly, "And we should have trusted you more, given you space to express yourself." The revelations hit Claire like a tidal wave. Anger, triumph, guilt, and relief all collided within her chest. For the first time, she understood the complexity of her parents' decisions and the depth of their love, masked by control and fear. Claire, in turn, expressed a mix of apology and pride, acknowledging both her actions and their consequences. "I wanted to be seen, to have control over my life. I didn't know how to do it without causing chaos," she admitted, voice trembling yet firm. Margaret and Robert nodded, a fragile understanding passing between them, the tension easing, replaced by cautious empathy. The weekend's conflict, born of rebellion and secrecy, now became a foundation for dialogue and emotional connection. By evening, the three sat together, the cabin transformed from a battlefield into a space of tentative reconciliation. The fire flickered, casting warm light on faces that had once been guarded, now open and honest. Claire felt the weight of guilt and triumph merge into something more profound: connection, understanding, and the realization that rebellion could lead to revelation, but only if tempered by empathy. The weekend had tested them all, leaving scars, but also forging a path toward a family dynamic that was more honest, more human, and unexpectedly stronger. Claire was gathering her thoughts in the quiet of the cabin when a sudden knock on the door made her jump. She hesitated, heart hammering, unsure who could be visiting at this hour. Margaret opened the door cautiously, and standing there was a man she had never seen before, holding an envelope with her name on it. "Claire, I think this belongs to you," he said, his voice calm, but urgent. The air thickened with suspense, and Claire's mind raced with questions. The weekend had already been chaotic, but this new presence promised to change everything. She tore open the envelope with trembling hands, revealing a letter and a photograph from her childhood. The letter detailed a hidden connection, an uncle she had never known existed, one Margaret had kept secret to protect her from family conflict. The photograph showed a young Claire, smiling with a boy she didn't recognize, a boy whose resemblance to the man at the door was undeniable. Shock, disbelief, and curiosity collided inside her. Her carefully constructed rebellion suddenly seemed trivial in the face of this revelation. Margaret stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never told you, because I thought it would complicate everything. I was trying to protect you." Claire's emotions churned, a mixture of betrayal, understanding, and awe at the depth of family secrets. Robert placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes reflecting a mixture of guilt and relief. Claire realized that her parents' controlling behavior, her feelings of neglect, and the cabin chaos had all been influenced by this hidden layer of family history. The man introduced himself as Daniel, her long-lost cousin, whose life had been shaped by estrangement and silence. He had recently uncovered family records and sought to reconnect before it was too late. Claire felt an overwhelming mixture of curiosity and caution, unsure how to process this sudden intrusion into her carefully navigated world. The weekend's tension now became a backdrop to a much larger, more profound revelation, one that challenged her understanding of identity, family, and loyalty. Claire's mind raced as she looked at Daniel, seeing fragments of herself reflected in his features. Questions flooded her, each demanding answers. Why had she never known him? What circumstances had forced Margaret to keep this secret? Could this newfound connection change the family dynamics she had fought so hard to assert control over? Every plan, every act of rebellion, suddenly felt both insignificant and pivotal in a new light. Margaret began to explain the history, recounting strained relationships, financial pressures, and decisions made out of fear and protection. Claire listened, astonished at the sacrifices and secrecy that had shaped her family's past. The revelation reframed her anger, her triumph, and even her guilt, giving depth to a weekend that had seemed chaotic, but was now illuminated by understanding. She realized that her rebellion had inadvertently paved the way for these truths to surface, connecting her to a family she hadn't known existed. By nightfall, the cabin was filled with a fragile sense of wonder, awe, and reconciliation. Claire sat between her parents and Daniel, absorbing the story, piecing together the hidden fragments of family history. The chaos of the weekend now merged with revelation and emotional depth, leaving her both humbled and exhilarated. For the first time, Claire saw the full complexity of her family: strength, vulnerability, secrets, and love intertwined. And as the fire flickered softly in the cabin, she understood that this unexpected twist had forever changed the course of her life and the bonds that held her family together. The morning after Daniel's arrival, the cabin felt different, charged with new energy and possibility. Claire watched as Margaret moved through the kitchen, her movements softer, less rigid than usual. Robert hummed quietly, a rare smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, while Daniel explored the room with curiosity and awe. The air was still tense, but it carried hope, rather than anger. Claire realized that the weekend's chaos had created space for connection, for understanding, and for beginnings that had been impossible before. Over breakfast, the conversation flowed cautiously, filled with questions, laughter, and shared memories. Claire and Daniel compared stories, discovering uncanny similarities in their upbringing despite years apart. Margaret and Robert listened, occasionally interjecting with clarifications or anecdotes, their faces softening with pride and relief. Claire felt a growing sense of belonging, a thread of family connection weaving through the tension and mistrust of the past. For the first time, rebellion and reconciliation felt like two sides of the same coin. Later, they walked together through the forest surrounding the cabin, the crisp air clearing the remnants of the weekend's anxiety. Claire observed her parents moving naturally with Daniel, the vulnerability she had once criticized now a sign of strength and authenticity. She realized that control and rebellion were fleeting, but understanding and empathy could create lasting bonds. The laughter, teasing, and gentle arguments were proof that her family was learning to navigate complexity, embracing both imperfections and revelations. Claire found herself opening up more than she had anticipated, speaking honestly about her feelings, regrets, and hopes for the future. Margaret listened with tears glistening, Robert with a quiet nod of approval, and Daniel with a mixture of curiosity and compassion. Each word built bridges, connecting hearts that had long been isolated by misunderstanding. The cabin, once a stage for chaos and rebellion, now served as a sanctuary for honesty, healing, and reconciliation. By mid-afternoon, the family sat around the living room, sharing stories, photographs, and letters. The past weekend's turbulence had softened into reflection, and Claire felt a profound sense of closure mixed with exhilaration. Daniel revealed more about his journey to find them, illuminating hidden struggles and triumphs that reframed Claire's perception of her parents. She realized that the rebellion, while disruptive, had catalyzed dialogue and understanding that might otherwise have remained buried. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting golden light across the cabin, Claire experienced an unfamiliar serenity. The fire crackled in the hearth, and voices mingled in laughter, storytelling, and gentle teasing. She sensed that the family, once divided by secrecy and miscommunication, was beginning to repair itself with newfound clarity. The bridges that had been burned or strained were now rebuilt on trust, empathy, and shared revelation. By nightfall, Claire sat quietly by the window, reflecting on the whirlwind of the weekend. Triumph, rebellion, chaos, revelation, and reconciliation had intertwined into a story that was both painful and beautiful. She realized that understanding, courage, and empathy were more powerful than control or revenge. The cabin, once a symbol of tension and defiance, now represented connection, healing, and hope for the future. Claire knew that the weekend had changed them all, and in doing so, had reshaped her own sense of family, identity, and belonging. The final morning of the weekend dawned crisp and golden, casting light across the cabin that felt almost sacred. Claire sat quietly on the porch, watching Margaret, Robert, and Daniel move through the morning routine with ease and laughter. The tension that had gripped the weekend was gone, replaced by a fragile but growing harmony. Claire felt a mixture of relief, pride, and humility. Her rebellion had sparked chaos, but it had also unearthed truths and built bridges that might never have existed otherwise. Margaret approached her with a warm, unguarded smile. "Claire, I know this weekend wasn't easy, but I see you now, and I'm proud of how you've faced everything." The words resonated deeply, carrying acknowledgement of both her rebellion and her courage. Robert nodded in agreement, his usual quiet demeanor infused with approval and respect. Claire realized that the reconciliation wasn't about erasing past mistakes, but embracing the complexity of emotions, choices, and human imperfection. Daniel, standing nearby, added softly, "I never imagined finding family like this. Thank you for letting me in." Claire's heart swelled as she realized the unexpected twist of the weekend. The stranger who became family had transformed not only her understanding of the past, but also her vision for the future. In that moment, the cabin symbolized more than a weekend getaway. It was a crucible where anger, revelation, and connection had merged into a lasting bond. They gathered around the table for one final meal together, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet reflection. Claire felt a profound sense of closure, understanding that power, rebellion, and autonomy were fleeting compared to empathy, trust, and familial connection. Every glance, every smile, every gesture carried weight, the weight of lessons learned, misunderstandings resolved, and love rediscovered. The cabin, once a stage of chaos, had become a haven of understanding, where past grievances could be acknowledged and released. As they packed to leave, Claire felt the bittersweet pull of departure. The weekend had transformed her, reshaped her relationships, and redefined her sense of family. The lessons of courage, empathy, and resilience were etched into her mind and heart, alongside the thrilling memory of having taken control of her life. She realized that rebellion could ignite change, but it was understanding and reconciliation that truly forged lasting bonds. Before leaving, Claire stood at the cabin's edge, taking in the forest, the firelit rooms, and the people she had once thought she could never understand. Margaret and Robert exchanged quiet, meaningful glances, while Daniel smiled warmly, a living reminder of secrets revealed and connections restored. Claire felt a sense of completion, a resolution that was both satisfying and humbling. She understood that family, in all its complexity, could survive chaos, embrace truths, and emerge stronger on the other side. As the car pulled away and the cabin faded into the distance, Claire looked back one last time, heart full of gratitude and clarity. The rebellion, the chaos, and the revelations had all been part of a journey that changed her, her parents, and Daniel forever. She knew that the lessons of the weekend would guide her through future challenges, and that empathy, courage, and understanding were the true measures of strength. And with that, Claire embraced the road ahead, knowing that her family, fractured, complicated, yet resilient, was finally whole.